Saroyan in Iran, 1972. William Saroyan was a traveler, and by the 1970s, after decades as a major cultural figure, he began to visit many countries that were new to him, and often these were countries with significant Armenian populations. In 1972, this included visits to countries like India, where he met the Armenian population of Calcutta, and Lebanon, where he was greeted incredibly warmly in Beirut. After several days in Beirut, Saroyan flew Iran Air to Tehran for his first and only visit to the nation. Tehran's Armenian population is ancient. Since antiquity, there has been a great deal of contact between the Armenians and the Persians, and at times the different Persian empires have included parts of, or indeed the entirety, of what we consider today to be historical Armenia. In the 11th century, the Seljuks invaded and drove thousands of Armenians into Persia, where they put down roots and established churches and schools. A series of treaties and invasions led to the population become more and more isolated from other Armenians, as that part of the world was carved up by the Ottoman Empire, Russia, and others. Still, Armenians have been the largest religious minority in Iran for generations, more so even than the Assyrians, who come second despite being more traditionally indigenous to the nation. Saroyan arrived in Tehran on the afternoon of June 30th, 1972. His journey had been slightly vexing, as every Armenian he encountered seemed to recognize him, and few gave him any personal space. He noted he had to constantly deal with the usual Armenian interruptions of Beirut, all made by fine, fascinating, and infuriating people. On the flight, he got very sick and vomited throughout the whole thing. This was unusual for Saroyan, who seldomly got seasick on weeks-long sea voyages. But he attributed it to esophagitis. Landing, he grabbed a taxi to the Park Hotel, and finding the hotel to be utterly suitable, he set upon himself the task of relaxing. Saroyan himself said that he was never much of a rest and relaxation type. Even his procrastination tended to be focused on non-productive activity rather than actual rest. For his first 24 hours in Tehran, he did little but work at his typewriter and ignore the annoying ring of his room's telephone. He did eventually take a call from Bishop Karakin Sarkisian of Isfahan. The bishop invited Saroyan for a visit, and he agreed to come in 2 days' time. That seemed to invigorate Saroyan into exploring Tehran properly. He got in contact with a local bishop of the Armenian Church, Ardak Manukian. This was a frequent idea of Saroyan's. If he wanted to see a new city and there was an Armenian church anywhere in it, he'd contact a cleric and use them to gain entry into the town. Interestingly, in the process of going through the hotel switchboard to contact Bishop Manukian, the operator introduced herself as Iraksi Rostomian, a Persian-born Armenian. He apparently found their brief conversation pleasant enough that he struck up more conversations during the rest of his stay at the Park Hotel. Saroyan was taken around by the bishop and other church officials, but he didn't have a very good time. He seemed to think that they were trying to be on for him, and they didn't have the comedic chops for it. As often happened when he became bored with forced interaction with people, he started to look down on their roles in society. I was hungry, and I suddenly had the feeling that while those men were in fact the only glue in the Armenian nation in dispersion, they were also very common, ordinary, and even inferior material out of which to do the people any real good, and this added to my annoyance. As usual, Saroyan was in demand from the press, so his guides brought him to the local Armenian newspaper, Alik. They took many photos, but by this time, Saroyan was starving and exceptionally irritable. The party headed to the Armenian Club, a restaurant frequented by upper-class Armenians in the city. There, he basically drank water and waited until he could find someone to drive him back to his hotel. An Iranian businessman ended up driving him home, which relieved Saroyan greatly. He did note that he had been in a funk while splitting his time between Fresno, San Francisco, and Paris. While he had strong social ties to group in San Francisco and Paris, Fresno was not nearly as open to him, and oddly he spent most of his time there. Just let me be grateful that I am indeed doing all this well, for in Fresno, for days on end, by the week and month, I have felt virtually unalive from not being involved in anything. As always seemed to happen, he was besieged by requests for visits and photographs, though this trip he limited them, or at least tried to. The next morning got a call from Jeffrey Light of the Iranian American Society asking if he would be willing to attend a reception in his honor. He asked if there was someone from the society who might take him around and show him the city. And Light said he'd look into it. No sooner had he hung up on that call than the local Armenian church contacted him about spending the day with various church officials. He politely put them off. Saroyan ended up going out for a walk, but quickly turned around to spend the day in his hotel room. He had issues ordering room service, but eventually found himself enjoying delightful matzoon, yogurt, and bread. Another round of calls came in, including a call from Miss Janet Lazarian. They had a chat about mutual acquaintances in Yerevan and Moscow, and could she come over with a cameraman and then perhaps take him to a play? Flying in a Cage by Musa Mesgarian. This led to a rather strange moment. After having done photographs for the paper that employed Miss Lazarian, and meeting a few other newspaper people, they headed off to the play at the Tehran Youth Palace. They were late, but they did make the curtain call. The play had ended prematurely when one of the young actors had accidentally stabbed the star. Saroyan and Lazarian then headed off to another play, an avant-garde one-act. He did not record the name of the play, nor the writer. After that performance, they headed off for a large meal and finally returned to the Park Hotel, where a dozen messages waited for him, several of which he decided to respond to. One of them was from Nadja Aslanian, who invited Saroyan and several others up to his vineyard. One of those who would be joining them was Sajek Chubak, a leading figure in Persian literature. Before he could get out the door the next afternoon, he wrote, "Suffered half a dozen fools this morning and one this afternoon." One of the fools he suffered was a rich man in his family who dared to ask, "Why do you not write the story of the Armenian people?" which angered Saroyan greatly. He saw all of his writing as writing the story of the Armenian people. He attended the visit to the winery of Aslanian in a foul mood, though enjoyed meeting with Chubak and various academics who had done their time in the U.S. At one point, he told off the host of the party, but there may have been a hidden reason for all of his testiness: a bad tooth. "The rotten front tooth must come out," Saroyan wrote in his journal. "It has made a fool of me for too long." He had it pulled out by Dr. Eduardo Grigorians. The full root was removed cleanly, and blood came fairly steadily. I signed a copy of Places to him, and he refused to let me write a check for his services. After a day of rest and several calls and in-room visits by members of the Armenian clergy and a few others, Saroyan left Tehran for Isfahan, taking a car with Loris Cheknavorian, a composer. The two discussed working together on an opera on the ride to the airport, though it's uncertain whether or not anything came of that discussion. Cheknavorian would go on to become one of the most important composers of Armenian descent over the next 50 years. While the modern Armenian populations of Iran settled in Tehran and Tabriz in the north, there had been a significant Armenian population in Isfahan. He caught a flight which he managed to make through without incident. Arriving, he was greeted by the press and a gathering of Armenian Iranian clergy. That was followed by something that would seem unthinkable in Iran today: an American Independence Day celebration. There, Saroyan met several significant figures in the Iranian government, including Manucher Piroz, the former Governor General. He finally arrived at his hotel, the Shah Abbas, for dinner, which he called rotten. He enjoyed a few drinks, partly to dull the pain of his still aching teeth. His first day was apparently much better than his entire visit to Tehran, and he practically gushed about the day in his journal. Well, there is perhaps no spot in the world sweeter in light and air than Isfahan, and I am there, and I have seen and breathed its green and tasted in the nostrils the scent of its flowing town stream under the beautiful bridge built by Armenians about 300 years ago. I have visited the Armenian church, full of paintings in frames and on walls and ceilings, a telling of the stories of the Old and New Testaments, and I have walked around 10,000 stones in the Armenian cemetery out by the athletic stadium beyond the university, with stones for Christians from all over the world, including England and Portugal. And I have been received by His Excellency the Governor-General of Isfahan, Dr. G.H.R. Kinapur, a very gentle and cultured man with a touch of melancholy, to whom I presented a copy of my human comedy paperback. Isfahan is known for its beauty, and has been for centuries. The Shah Abbas Hotel is across the street from the grounds of the Hasht Behesht Palace, considered to be one of the most beautiful urban parks in all of the world. The stream he refers to is most likely the Zayandarud, quite near the Shah Abbas. The Zayandarud is the largest river in central Iran, and often with a strong flow, but would have been running somewhat weaker than normal during that period in July, perhaps appearing more like a stream than a mighty river. By the 1980s and 90s, damming of the river led to the loss of its permanent flow. In the 1970s, it would have been a constant but variable river. The bridge he refers to is almost certainly the Siose Pole, built between 1599 and 1602 during the reign of Abbas the Great. The bridge served as a vital link to the Armenian quarter of Isfahan. It's not 100% clear if Armenians did the actual building, though that has been claimed for centuries. It is the largest crossing of the Zayandarud. The Armenian church he mentions could be one of several, but the clue of full of paintings in frames and on walls and ceilings seems to lean us towards Vank Cathedral. The cathedral was begun during the reign of Abbas the Great, and was certainly constructed by Iranian Armenians over a period of roughly 70 years. Along the walls are paintings that cover the story of creation, the expulsion from Eden, and the life of Jesus. At eye level, there are images of the tortures of Armenian martyrs running all along the walls. The cathedral is built in a hybrid style, and the main form appearing to fit in with the style of Iranian mosques, but with elements such as an asp that speak to the Western cathedral tradition. The cemetery he mentions is the New Julfa Armenian Cemetery, which was established in the early 17th century. New Julfa, where thousands of Armenians had been relocated during the reign of Abbas the Great, is one of the oldest Armenian enclaves in the world. The cemetery is one of the largest Armenian cemeteries in the world, but also has significant sections for Polish refugees who died there, waiting to depart for the Persian Gulf to sail to permanent settlements in Africa or New Zealand. An interesting note about New Julfa is the distinct dialect of Eastern Armenian spoken there for centuries is now widely spoken in only two places, New Julfa and Southern California, near Los Angeles. This day of touring would have given Saroyan a strong introduction to Armenian Isfahan, but he continued his tour with stops to meet the administration of the University of Isfahan, and then to the prelacy for a massive Armenian lunch. He enjoyed his time with the bishops here, calling them lively gentlemen, each devoted to the church. He did overeat, and paid for that. He returned to his hotel clearly reinvigorated for the rest of his trip. He noted that, all in good order, for the reason that I have no rotten tooth in my mouth making me angry. As always, Saroyan visited cultured people. They would discuss and sometimes argue about writing. The Governor-General likes the writing of a Turk named Aziz Nisan, who writes short stories. Also, Sadak Hayadat, a very depressed writer who committed suicide by gas. Also, Jamal Zadeh of a long time ago, and Ali Ahmad, and Sadak Chubak, whom I met with the other night, and of whom I have the odd image. He removed his shirt and revealed a balloon of an upper body that went floating across his green lawn like some kind of swollen animal in some kind of simple exultation. A very strange sight. He argued bitterly with his Turkish friend, the poet Barahani, whose longest poem appears to be in immediate debt to Allen Ginsberg, who I find unfortunate in itself as a starting point. The poet Saroyan argued with was Reza Barahani, one of the most prominent poets of the time. He was known for his politically charged work of the 1970s, as well as being an acclaimed translator of works into and out of Persian. He would have just released his novel, The Infernal Days of Mr. Ayaz, which was later banned in Iran. Saroyan's reference to immediate debt to Ginsberg might refer to the fact that his poems of the time were certainly playing in the same field stylistically as works like Kaddish and Howl. Barahani would later be jailed and tortured for his writings against the Shah, and would go into exile in the United States afterwards. Ginsberg's writing at that time also had a political bent, specifically works like the CIA dope Calypso. The Next Day, which he said was one enormous rip-roaring day full of all sorts of things. He spoke at a gathering of 300 teachers from Armenian schools across Iran. A lunch was served which was so filling that Saroyan found himself sick again before having to deliver a speech in Armenian, and enjoying a performance of local schoolchildren. The event was long and tiring, and continued into a dinner equally as filling as the lunch had been, and which Saroyan chose to skip. At the event, he met several people who interested him, including a woman from Saroyan's ancestral home, Bitlis, whose 94-year-old father had just passed away, and may have known his father Armanak. He seemed particularly impressed with theological student Sherman Fung, a man on a mission in Iran who had married an Armenian woman and had 2 kids. The next day, he seemed headed towards exhaustion again. All right, I must get along into this day, and I shall insist on taking it easy, and not letting myself get buffaloed into anything stupid. In short, watch it. Even with that said, he arranged a trip to Shiraz, a city more than 300 miles away. He was driven by a local Armenian man he had met in an earlier events, Hovannes Ohanyan. The trip was a 6-hour drive. Saroyan described the trip as the furthest thing from taking it easy. Well, it has been one hell of a day, one hell of a drive. What can I call it? One hell of an exercise in putting up with foolishness. What absolutely preposterous people, from the bishop to everybody else, including the poor thick gentleman, Hovannes Ohanyan, in his broken-down Mercedes, which lost water every 15 minutes for the first 3 hours of travel, or so it seemed. At any rate, it is a miracle. He settled in at the Hotel Cyrus Intercontinental in Shiraz, which had been open for less than a year. He had already arranged to fly back to Isfahan, so he wouldn't be forced to endure another day of driving the 6 hours. He also decided that he would be staying an extra night instead of leaving in the morning. He instructed the switchboard operator to pretend like he had already checked out. He was determined to have a relaxing stay in Shiraz. In fact, he only left the room once the first day, for a walk into the park neighboring the hotel. He spent his time soaking in the bath, writing letters, and apparently journaling. He wrote 7 pages of journal entries in the first 24 hours in Shiraz. He also got several newspapers brought up to his room, one of which featured photos of him from the party at the vineyard. As was often the case when he attempted to order room service in countries where he did not speak the principal language, he had great difficulty ordering at the Hotel Cyrus. A mystifying chat on the phone with 3 successive non-English speaking waiters, and finally they will come up with a dinner menu for which I will choose something or other for a very nice quiet meal. Later, he added, "The stupidest room service in the world. Everything a big production and all wrong." The next morning, he apparently lifted his embargo on phone calls and reported that he had several, and later received several visitors. He also, again, adjusted his travel plans. He had been scheduled to visit Kabul, Afghanistan, but changed his mind and would fly back to Tehran and then directly on to Calcutta, India. He checked out of his room and headed to the Shiraz airport, where he enjoyed a coffee shop meal of pilaf and chicken with tomato. His final entry on his time in Shiraz was exceptionally Saroyan-esque. And so that's it for Shiraz. The ancient home of poets, roses, wine, nightingales. If it wasn't a four-way parley, I don't know what it is. Good enough. At least I rested here. At any rate, I certainly saw no great man's tomb. In a city known for its tombs being the main driver of tourism, perhaps it was harder to avoid them than to visit one. Saroyan's time in Iran in the waning years of the Shah was brief, but shows his commitment to being among the Armenian people of the world, of remaining open even when he'd rather close himself off, and of a man who might be cantankerous, but is self-aware enough to admit it. He would continue his trip to India and then to Japan, Hong Kong, and finally back to San Francisco. It was the longest and probably most exhausting trip he took in the 1970s. Thank you for listening to From the Collection of Forever Saroyan. I'm Chris Garcia. See you next week.